people don't realize that there is a lot of diversity inside of Ukraine. I mean, maybe not as much as we have in the United States, but the fact that you were there, what do you make of the stories of the differences between the way people are being treated at the border as they're trying to escape? Have you heard any feedback that people are being treated differently when they try to flee, based on their color of their skin?
I know this situation, but I am famous Ukrainian. I am member of women parliament, and you know, Russian propaganda do everything about guilty our country in racism. It's not true, because I'm Ukraine gave me everything for my life, and I know Ukrainian is very tolerant country, and we don't support racism here. That's 100%, you know.
I guess for Joke Reid, she thinks this is what qualifies as brilliantly refuting the truth about Ukraine's anti-black racism. Why? That'll show all of those black media folks online. That'll show them. She and the rest of the bootlegs, they can't deny what's been going on over there. The systematic racism that the Africans have been facing, and as I told you previously, she's not denying it. Instead, these bootlegs are trying to minimize it. They're saying, okay, well, it's there, but it's not as bad as all that. Why, someone's doing something about that. Now, just like with their other propaganda pieces they posted on YouTube, and just like with Reid's now infamous segment telling the Africans to just stay put, Reid has a white person, a member of the Ukrainian government, there to observe. Last time she pulled this stunt, it was John Brennan who was overseeing, supervising, guest panelist on that segment. This time it's a woman named Ustanova. Apparently, Joke Reid and her pals can't deny white racism without having a white person there to watch them do it. But of course, Reid didn't ask the white woman, Ustanova, about racism in Ukraine. She didn't ask her any questions about that at all. Ustanova would be the person you would naturally think ought to be asked about this. The racism isn't the Africans against the Ukrainians, that's for sure. Ustanova was simply asked the typical boilerplate questions about Putin, Russian aggression, humanitarian aid, etc. That way she could give the standard spiel. In other words, no tough questions about Ukraine's behavior. Nothing that would, as Joke Reid put it, fracture the unity. So this white woman didn't have to answer any uncomfortable questions. She's shielded from that, even though that's what a large part of the world outside Ukraine has been demanding answers to. And when Joke Reid pretends to discuss this issue, she talks to the one lone biracial member of the Ukrainian parliament. She doesn't bring on any of those Africans and ask them, hey, how are they treating you? Instead, she talks to one guy who Ukraine has done a hell of a lot for. And this Zon Belanuk guy, he doesn't deny any of the incidents. Instead, he gives a bland, rambling denial that Ukraine is racist, saying that we don't support racism here. So when he says we don't support racism here, it's obviously because Ukraine has always been egalitarian towards him, or at the very least, they haven't been too aggressively anti-black, right? I mean, he wouldn't be denying it or otherwise saying we don't support it if these guys had been just in his face aggressive with the racism, right? Except that's exactly what he's done. Because just a little over 6 months ago, right after Zon Belanuk had won his Olympic gold medal, something that's extremely rare for Ukraine. It's rare for them to win a medal, period, in the Olympics, and it's even more rare for them to win a gold medal. And he became the target of racist abuse by some young men in the streets of Kyiv. That's the capital of Ukraine. Bad enough that the Tokyo Olympics had to be postponed. Bad enough that all the athletes had to extend their training regimens. It was just brutal for them just to get there. He goes through all of that, wins gold, actually makes it where Ukraine is mentioned for something other than neo-Nazis. And when he gets back, some of the neo-Nazis made it clear, you're not going to steal the spotlight from us. And just in case anyone tries to say that, well, it must have been a small incident, probably didn't mean much. No, it meant something, because Belanuk himself posted on Facebook that these racists told him to go back to Africa, and they were asking him, what does a black monkey know about patriotism? And from what Belanuk said, these guys were trying to provoke a violent confrontation with them. This is what happened in Volodymyr Zelensky's Ukraine just 7 months ago. tried to imply that, well, maybe he took it in stride. First thing he's asking is, I wonder if I am Ukrainian for my country. What criteria of patriotism exists in it? How safe can an Olympic champion feel in his homeland and in his hometown? This is what was going on just 7 months ago. This is what he was saying. Whatever happened to we don't support racism in Ukraine, he wasn't talking any of that stuff 7 months ago. He was questioning his country, questioning the people in it, questioning his place in that country. He wasn't making any blanket denials of racism then, was he? But since then, apparently, young Mr. Bellenuke must have developed a case of selective amnesia to have forgotten about all that, and the way that he responded to this racial attack. This is the guy who's now claiming we don't support racism here. And who exactly is we? Because you would have thought that after what happened to him last summer, he would have figured out that when it comes to not supporting racism in Ukraine, he's a constituency of one. Now, to a half-wit like Joke Reid, she probably thought that this was brilliantly dodging the issue. She set up a staged, scripted segment where the producers at NBC got to choose their own cherry-picked non-white citizen of Ukraine who was going to be a spokesperson for all the non-white folks in Ukraine, particularly the black ones. He was going to speak for all black people in Ukraine, whether they be citizens or visitors, and he was going to give a blanket denial of Ukrainian racism, and then the white media pretends to address the issue when in fact they did nothing. That's what Joke Reid hoped this would be, but in the black media, we don't shy away from doing our homework. We believe in bringing the receipts. Now, it was no accident that Joke Reid did this and asked this Zon Bellenuke, but she didn't ask any of the Africans who were trying to get out of Ukraine. Why didn't she bring them on? They're the ones with his concerns. She ought to be thinking about them first. They should be the main ones she wants to talk to. Now, clearly this Zon guy has very limited English, and I don't fault him for that. But I do fault him for the fact that he's not being straight about this. He's trying to whitewash it. And my problem is that Reid didn't ask that white Ustinova woman to answer that question. Obviously, the network had given her her marching orders, not that she needed to be told. She was not to embarrass the Ukrainians or to put them on the spot. Don't say or ask any questions that would make them look bad, especially not about race, because, Vladimir Putin saying these guys are a haven of neo-Nazis, and last thing we need is anyone bringing up that members of the Ukrainian parliament have been racially assailed and harassed by some of these good white racists over there. Seems Vladimir Putin's not the only one trying to control what people see over the airwaves. So instead of asking the racist white people of the Ukrainian government, why are they being racist, and what are they doing about these racist incidents, instead she brings on one sole only black member of the Ukrainian parliament. The only one. Is this Zon Bellenuke guy an example of what the typical black person in Ukraine's life experience is? How many black people in Ukraine are Olympic athletes? How many are members of the Ukrainian parliament? Literally, just one. To call this guy an outlier or to call him an exception to the rule would be an insult to outliers and exceptions. But moreover than that, let's be bluntly honest here. As he himself said, the Ukrainian government has given him everything. And since he depends on them for every crumb of his daily bread, what do you expect him to say when you ask him about anti-black racism there? He's not going to be indicting the very country that he claims gave him everything and did so much for him. Of course he's going to say everything's fine. Oh, a couple of isolated incidents, but nothing really big. In fact, he didn't even go that far. Nothing about isolated incidents. Nothing about what happened to him. We're just sweeping that all under the rug and pretending that it didn't happen. This propaganda isn't fooling anyone. None of the people who have been calling out the anti-black racism by the Ukrainians are going to be satisfied with this. Because this Bellenuke guy isn't one of the black people trying to get out. He is a citizen of Ukraine. He's certainly not an African trying to leave the country. He wants to be there. Hell, he's like 30 or 31 years old, an Olympic athlete. He's a single male. I don't think he's married or has children. He's exactly the kind of young male who Zelensky's martial law edict prevents from leaving the country. So he's the last one who should be asked about this issue. It doesn't pertain to him at all. But of course, this is all about manufacturing optics that will lend itself to the white media narrative. So not only is he going to be the first person who the white media puts in front of the camera, as you see, he'll be the only one. Because what this is all about is finding some person with the requisite amount of melanin who they can put in front of the camera and who they know is going to say the right thing. This is all practically scripted. It's meant to affirm a white media narrative. But when the racism is on these bootlicks, Joke Reid is exactly what I'm talking about. So all I can say to Joke Reid and the rest of the clowns over at MSNBC, all the rest of the bootlicks like Tiffany Cross Eyes and Jonathan putting on his cape art and the rest of the clowns like CNN and such is, if you guys are going to be trying to whitewash Ukraine's anti-black racism, you're going to have to do a lot better than this. But the real question is, why are you trying to whitewash it at all? I thought that the entire point of the media was supposed to be to pursue the truth without fear and without favor. Well, that's what you would think if you allowed the white media to tell you what their alleged mission is. But as I've explained to you, the purpose of any media is to promote a value system. And when you look at white supremacy's list of values, anti-black racism is number one on that list. White supremacy is a negative affirmation. It defines itself not by what it is, but by what it is not. This is why these white supremacists do such a horrible job of trying to defend and deflect away from their own racism, because that's not part of what constitutes their identity. That's not part of their psychological makeup. Well, over here in the black media, truth is the foundation of our psychological makeup. For some of us, it's in the name. Now, you notice that I'm not taking any digs at Son Villeneuve himself, not at his parentage, not at the fact that he's an immigrant on top of being an immigrant, not even going into the whole tragic mulatto thing. We're not going there with it because we don't have to. Just keep in mind what you're seeing here, an escalation of the propaganda. You went from having just Joke Reid with some so-called historian. Now you got Joke Reid here, who apparently has not even a semblance of sympathy for her own folks back in the motherland. And she's conducting a segment with a biracial Ukrainian who's denying the very racism that he himself was subjected to just last summer. Well, Joke Reid may be fully prepared to sell her soul and sell black people out just to get a network TV gig. And Son Villeneuve apparently just to get himself a job in the public sector, he's willing to do something much akin to it to deny the very racism that he knows is going on. That's good enough for them, but over here in the B1, that will never be good enough for us. These white supremacists don't have enough gold medals, they don't have enough government jobs or enough network jobs to buy us off. And as for Joke Reid and Son Villeneuve, we all know how this is going to end, because we know how it is with all these bootlicks. When they have expended their usefulness under white supremacy, be it in U.S. or Ukraine, they're going to be unceremoniously booted out the door. Nobody's going to apologize for it, and nobody's even going to be polite about it. It's just going to be, get the hell out of here. And when that moment inevitably comes, I'm sure that Joke Reid will be sounding just like Melissa Harris Lacewell Perry before her. And I'm also sure that Mr. Son Villeneuve will also suddenly remember that while he may not support racism in Ukraine, a hell of a lot of the other folks in Ukraine do. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Eve, Luke Thies, Stay Positive, Isaac, and Reginald. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you. Black empowerment has taken the stage in a big way leading up to the 2020 presidential election, because this is not going to be an event, it's going to be a process. And of course the issue that has become paramount and emblematic of the entire black empowerment political struggle happens to be reparations, because it's been effectively used by the new voices of black media in order to help separate the real from the bone. As we've seen, though, the white media is not about to sit on its hands and allow black folks to assert themselves. They understand that they've got to get out in front of this story as quickly as possible. So, just a couple of days ago, you had one of the worst white media outlets on the planet, USA Today, who decided that they were going to try to insinuate themselves into the issue of black folks in American slavery, and they decided that they would use a black slave in order to do it. Now, look at this article here. Right off the bat, we got a big problem. entire so-called article is based on a research paper written by a white woman in England. Some woman named Hannah Durkin. Yeah, I never heard of her either. They don't show her face, naturally, but she's simple enough to find online. And what a surprise, yeah, she's white, all right. This is her bio page from Newcastle University's website. You look at it, what you see is her PhD has nothing to do with Africa, but that's okay, because it seems like her memberships do. And it seems as if this woman has been set up by the white media, particularly its academic arm, for the sake of being the official mouthpiece on all things black. That seems to be the little hustle that the white media is setting her up for. Because when you look at what it is that this woman's done and her past associations, you see that for some strange reason this woman seems to have some kinky fixation as it pertains to race, which we all know means black. It's not until you look at the rest of her bio that you see that this woman seems to have a non-stop obsession with black people, particularly with black women, and it ain't because this woman wants to do us any favors. See, if you want to hear about black folks, why don't you talk to a black person? Well, because the white media is trying to find a way to legitimize white people talking for black folks. That's what this is about. Mrs. Durkin, she's going to be given a thin patina of legitimacy. And then, well, this white woman, she's very knowledgeable about black folks, and, well, she has our best interest at heart. That's why she's speaking for us, because apparently there were no black people who you could speak to. That's why they cite her university credentials, is to make it clear that, well, she's better informed, you see. Yeah, the best propagandists usually are. The very first direct quote that they take from Miss Durkin is, what makes Radoshi's story unique is that hers is the most complete story we have of a female Middle Passage survivor. Now, right off the bat, you got a story that's supposed to be about the last known survivor of the U.S. slave trade, as the white media states it, which is a misleading statement, by the way. Deliberately misleading. Then you got this white woman who, to hear USA Today tell it, apparently somehow inspired this article, which doesn't really illuminate anything or say anything, and nonetheless, she's giving all of these bold declarations, saying that this woman is a female Middle Passage survivor. Notice how right off the bat they're slipping in the feminist nonsense all the time. You will see this again. Apparently in Miss Durkin's lily white world, black men went to the nice plantations where apparently there were no whips, no sadistic overseers, and apparently no labor either. White feminists are agents of white supremacy. Who do you think it is who raised all of these racist white men that we have to deal with in the first place? They've been running that gender divide and conquer game on us successfully for decades now, and they're testing the waters with this one. This article is supposed to simply be about the last known survivor of the U.S. slave trade, not the last known female survivor, but that's the way that Durkin tells it. See, they draw you in by having you think it's only about the survivors of American slavery. Then all of a sudden, okay, now that we got you paying attention, here comes the feminist gender divide and conquer crap. See, they're testing us to see, will black women fall for it again? The Democrats have been trying everything they can to figure out how do they get black women back on board, because they need black folks to prop up the con of American democracy. And this is part of that effort. Now, when you look at the article's headline, it says the last known survivor of the U.S. slave trade is identified. Well, if you read that, then you would think that this was the last person to have come out of slavery, because that's the way that it's written. It would mislead you to that conclusion. But then you read the article, and the first line says, a woman believed to be the last living African-born survivor of the transatlantic slave trade. Wait a minute. The last African-born survivor of the slave trade? Now, come on. Is there some other place where America's slaves would have come from? Were America's slaves born in Siberia? The black folks taken to slavery? Were they born in Russia? Were they born in Australia? Were they born on the far side of the moon? It's redundant to say African-born, but the white media puts that in there because they know that since we were the ones who put reparations on the map and got slavery to be a crucial issue of modern presidential elections, now the the white media is deciding what kind of wedges can we drive, and they showed up with a whole handful of wedges. The white media is parsing words with these duplicitous titles, and they're doing it deliberately. Radoshi, the African woman who this white media piece talks about, died in the 1930s. Now, if you read that, you would think that she was the last survivor of American slavery, and this piece does nothing to inform you that this is the case. They don't even talk about anyone else who lived longer than her. What the white media doesn't tell you is that Radoshi was not the last surviving American slave. She was merely the last one who had been born in Africa. Well, at least the last one that anyone knows of, because when it comes to black folks, they were not really keeping records like that. Hell, you got a lot of black folks going around today, elderly black folks, born in the early 20th century, who have no birth certificates, which is why you got Republicans running around saying, well, you need to present a birth certificate if you want to be able to vote. Because they want some documentation that they know black folks in particular were denied. We'll be getting back to that in a moment. But it's important to keep in mind that you shouldn't be letting the white media make these declarations to you. Well, we are here to put the stamp of historical white authenticity on the idea that this Radoshi woman was the last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade. They should be telling everybody, well, the last one that we found, but then again, they ain't been looking very hard. I warned you about letting your enemy's propaganda outlets tell you about your own history. Because buried in the article is a single mention that after slavery, Radoshi, who was now being called Sally Smith, continued to live on the plantation with her child. So after slavery was over, she chose to live on the plantation. She chose to live with Massa, even after slavery, huh? Now, far be it from me to heap scorn upon or to otherwise cast aspersions on any of the survivors of slavery, but we got to be honest with ourselves about something as black folks. These good white folks, they didn't have all rights to like this to do us any favors. Okay? They didn't do this because they care so much about black folks. They reported something like this, they think it can be useful to white power. And we also have to be honest about the fact that the reason that so many of our slave rebellions failed was because we had a lot of black folks who were only too chummy with Massa in the big house. And when we left those plantations, unfortunately, we took a lot of those bootlicks, turncoats, and these wannabe bootleg jackasses with us. We brought a lot of the scumbags with us. Now, I'm not saying that Radoshi was one of them, but I am saying that, well, I find it kind of strange that after slavery, she decided she wanted to live in the big house with Massa. Keep in mind, when Strom Thurmond got that black woman pregnant when he was in the military academy, or wherever the hell little redneck was at. Keep in mind, she kept his secret, and her daughter kept that secret until the day that bastard died. You can't tell me what that was because of fear. Nah, we got something else going on here, folks. We need to be honest about that. So no, I'm looking at this Radoshi woman and I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to say that she definitely wasn't on our side. I am looking and going, I don't think these white folks just chose to talk about her simply by coincidence, but by chance. I think I'm starting to understand what made her story so compelling and interest-worthy to this white woman in England and to the good white folks in USA today. Let's set the facts straight, family. The last known survivor of America's killing fields, the plantations, was Sylvester McGee. He was born in 1841, and he didn't die until 1971. You heard that right. The man lived up to 130 years. Say, how much attention did he get after his death? Did USA Today cover any research papers about that? Well, there are some good white folks who decided that they are looking into the matter for the sake of trying to debunk it. As far as they're concerned, we gotta prove this nigger, he would. That's impossible. supported by slave trading records and a family Bible since destroyed that had a handwritten note giving his birth date. That's what the New York Times says, the white paper of record. If anyone was going to be running around trying to cast aspersions on the man, you better believe it would be the New York Slime saying that. You're going to have to be real careful. White media is going to be trying to rewrite the records. But WLBT in Mississippi, they did a piece about McGee in 2012. You had some black folks there who were trying to get the man a proper monument. Monument meaning headstone in this case. Though I think the man is probably worthy of a statue as well. I think that's without question. But according to this website, Mr. McGee had no birth certificate, but Chancery Court records in Covington County list him and his father as being passed on to the next of kin when their owner died in 1859. So that's at least for those of you black folks out there who are always asking for proof, as Brother Khalid Muhammad beautifully put it, we know what you really mean. What you really saying is, where can I find some white folks who will agree with you? Well, we found the New York Times, and we found some good old boys down in Mississippi, both of them saying two separate sources to identify this man and to support the claim of his age, trading records, and by trading, yeah, the New York Times reported he also had this in Mississippi say the same thing. Chancery, that's what they're talking about. Establishing that both Sylvester and his father were passed on as next of kin when their owner died in 1859. There you got it, folks. There you have it. So there's the white media going ahead and saying, yeah, it's true. And before anyone gets ready to say, well, man, you got a brother who went through all that, keep in mind it was only last year that Richard Overton, America's oldest World War II veteran and the youngest man in the United States, died at the age of 112. He died at the age of 112. This man was not only America's oldest World War II veteran, he was the oldest man in the United States at the time of his death. So no, Sylvester McGee was not the only veteran of an American war who happened to make it past the century mark, past 110. He was the only man who happened to be the oldest man in the United States. Brother's been doing that for a while now. Right?
Hey. Yeah, with Mom. Oh, just trying to make sure, you know, the medication ain't yeah, making sure none of the medication like does anything bad being mixed up or anything like that. But she's feeling good. Yeah. She's gotta heal more. Well, tired. She gotta take all these pills. Yeah, so her body can repair itself. How's me doing? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you make them plants grow quickly, you know that? Yeah, closer to the mountain. Yeah. Yeah, better air. Yeah, but how much will we put down? We can put 200, we can put 250 down? We can put 250 down? Like how much of a down payment? Like 250? Well, yeah, I know that. We can build on that. Well, remember what I told you. Always think to build underneath before we build on top. So like think, yeah, we gotta think about how deep we can go before we either hit like water or like rocks. Well, that's what I'm saying. With the water, we can use that for a generator for power, for electricity. A tank, to put the water in. Yeah, the pigs. Oh yeah, also what we think about, we can think about putting like a little store or something right there. Hmm. Because I want you to look at it and you need to like take pictures so like I can start determining like what we have to mess with. Yeah, I know you have to get it right there. Oh yeah, another thing I was thinking about, since it is a higher land, we can think about talking about to one of them cell phone or like the Wi-Fi company. No, I'm saying because depending on where our land is at, where when it comes to like satellite towers, yeah, towers. But like they're losing towers, and we can see if where we're at, where that land is at, we can see if we're in a good position where if we have to build a tower there, you understand what I'm saying? People in well, that's well, still that yeah, but it's the fact that them having access like that helps regardless of how big. That'll make their population want to get bigger. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, I need to look in and find out. Can you? What we have? Because I'm thinking about. Will we have to buy a cell phone? I mean, a Wi-Fi tower, or could we, you know, have a company rent the land so that they could put the the Wi-Fi tower there. You see what I'm saying? But they pay us. Yeah. Your own tower. Well, I think, yeah, that makes sense. But even still, they would, they wouldn't give us like a whole lot of issue about trying to put one there because that would help them out too. You see what I'm saying? Well, I mean, with that, we'll also you'll have to get one of those trucks with the bed in the back. Well, I mean, we can still go to your aunties and uncles. It's just the fact that you would have land. How much is the papers? You gotta find it, babe. Well, I mean, you have your Interpol license. So what it would be is just having them, reissue the paperwork. No, nothing's hard. It's just what do you have to do?
Come on! Again? You gonna do this? Oh my God!
Oh yeah, and a lot of places are locked down.
This is dumb. You gonna pay for this? Come on. You must be dumb as a mule tying me up.
Oh wow.
You gonna pay for this? Damn it! Again? Stanley. This one will keep you.
Amy, can you hear me? Oh, you outside? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like that idea. I'm gonna just see if I can get that put together, but I need you to go out there and look at the look at the property. Yeah, we can work on that. Don't worry about that. Just go look at it and see what it looks like, and send me back pictures. Yeah, no. What the making a cart out of the motorbike? Okay, I love you. Mhm. Hey.
Media doesn't report that. So people need to understand something. We're talking about slavery. And when did slavery end? That's what this is really about. It's about burying that. When you start saying, oh, some of the children are still alive, well, that becomes a thorny issue, not merely for the white media, but also for the white government and for the white society at large. See, for Generation Xers, Sylvester McGee's death was only a few years before we were born, and for all the baby boomers and even people like Barack Obama, that is definitely a living memory. Sylvester McGee died after Barack Obama was born. Sylvester McGee wasn't some anonymous victim who died way back when. It was only a few years before most of us were born. That's how close to us slavery is. Don't let these people get out here and tell you some bull crap about, oh, that was hundreds of years ago. The hell it was. Why, if you go along with the white media's narrative, why, the last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade died not even 80 years ago. So there you go. There you go, family. There it is. The white media monitors what we say in places like this. And they understand exactly how dangerous this kind of talk is. Because what's happening is we are putting into the public consciousness the reality not merely of the debt that's owed to black folks, but also the reality of how close slavery is to the present day. What is considered to be the truth in the mind of the masses? What does society consider to be the truth? Mostly what they consider to be the truth is whatever they've been told the most often. And for the longest time, white power has been able to dominate that discussion. It hasn't even been a discussion, it's just been a monologue. We've been completely and thoroughly shut out of it. But now we're asserting ourselves, we're educating people, and we're disproving a lot of the lies, getting rid of a lot of these assumptions. People are hearing something they hadn't heard before. What they're finding out is no, slavery was not hundreds of years ago. In fact, the last person who happened to have been in the killing fields of the American South only died a little over 40 years ago. That's the reality that nobody talks about. You ain't gonna have your good white liberals talking about it either. And you ain't gonna be having your good white academics talking about it either. No, I'm pretty sure that our good white pal, Mrs. Durkin, she ain't gonna be talking about it. Hannah Durkin ain't doing no research papers on Sylvester McGee. Because that wouldn't be helpful or conducive to white power. That wouldn't help the narrative that they want forward. You don't hear about Sylvester McGee because white power wants to be able to say, well, that slavery thing happened so long ago. Why, nobody alive today has even met a slave, for God's sake. Oh my God, everybody, that's your grandmother's time. Oh man, that's just so long ago. Those of us living today had absolutely nothing to do with that, and nobody from back then could be disadvantaged today, so there's no claims that can be made. I mean, it's not as if anybody in the 20th century was disadvantaged. But nobody's done the work of tracking down who survived slavery and what happened to them in the 20th century. Come on, where's our good friend Ken Burns at? He don't mind doing documentaries about the Civil War. Well, surely he can do documentaries about the survivors of slavery. What happened to all those black folks who came out of slavery? Track what happened to their lives. How many of them survived the killing fields of the American South, only to be killed in places like Rosewood, in places like Tulsa during the destruction of the Black Wall Street branch in Tulsa, or Charleston, or any of the freaking race riots that took place, Red Hook Summer and all of that, Houston. Why doesn't somebody ask some questions about that so people can understand this what was going on? You had black folks who survived the killing fields of the American South, only to be killed in the townships they established for themselves and their children. Oh, but black folks had not been oppressed. Oh, that was so long ago. Oh, that didn't disadvantage anyone. The only reason that this propaganda piece about this Ridoshi woman is out there is because of us. Reparations isn't going away. The critical mass of black people as a group in this country, worse than that, the contingent of black folks who get things done have decided that this is going to be our issue. And because of the fact that it not only forwards our interests, but reparations is basically a catchphrase for tangibles in general. It's the big noisy issue that not merely as our due, but also as our means of showing the severity of our intent. Yeah, we know it ticks you off, and we like that. Yeah, we know it makes you mad, we don't give a damn. It is our perfect way of sending the message. We're in your face. It happened so long ago. To hell with that. Cut the check. Well, the country can't afford it. If you can afford $3.5 billion for Israel a year, you can go ahead and take it out of their cut. Cut the check. Well, the immigrants ain't gonna like it without us. These scumbags wouldn't have had a country to come to. Cut the check. Dang right. Reparations is a great way to hit the reset button with everyone, so you can forget what you thought you knew about us. You can forget what you thought you had heard. You can forget all the old expectations for crushing them to dust. We're not trying to win a popularity contest anymore. The Negroes who are looking for attention because they want a pat on the head. The Negroes who are trying to get in good with this and that group. Those guys, they happen to be a dying breed. Those guys are going to be irrelevant because we're going to make them irrelevant. White power will be powerless to try to find some way to legitimize them. And it's the black folks who get things done who are making this happen. It ain't the pot-smoking, couch-riding, sit on their mamas, park a lounger 8 hours a day smoking a joint, the world-star hip-hop crowd, the wonder who Drake is beaming with this weak crowd. They're not going to get a damn thing done. They're not the ones who drive events. They will follow us after. It will not take all that long to start getting those scumbags on board because they are followers. They're shepherds. And we are the shepherds. Too long we've been letting white power run around with a little sheepdog, barking at us. We're being pushed over to this side or that side. Nah, not anymore. The shepherd's back on duty. And he's using that shepherd's staff to smack that sheepdog over the head until he get lost. This is my block. White power through its white pundits, its white politicians, and its white propagandists, they have miseducated the public to not take responsibility for where their prosperity comes from. They have indoctrinated everybody with talking points. Everybody knows that slavery is where the seed money for this country came from. Why is the U.S. richer than everyone else? Because it had huge advantages, principally that it had an enormous cash crop, cotton, which bootstrapped the economy, was produced for free. And nobody can compete with free. The United States had the biggest slavery industry in human history. That's where America's wealth came from. You got these other folks coming in here going, oh, there's still some left. We all come in here and help y'all solidify these gains, keep it away from these Negroes. What's happening is black folks are saying, forget that. Forget that. Damn right we're flexing on everyone else. Because for too damn long we've been sitting on our hands trying to figure out if we could persuade, cajole, if we can get some sympathy, if we can find a way to get people to feel sorry for us and see our condition and recognize their part in it. It's like, well, forget about that. Sympathy is overrated. Friendship is overrated. Family is what we need. And this is how we are aggregating those familial ties. And white power is trying to figure out some way that they can corrupt and contaminate our discussion. Now, they're not able to control what I say. They're not able to control what the new voices of black media say. So what they're doing is they're using their own media outlet in the hope that they can get to the non-black public. They're going to go ahead and talk to them. Hey, we got any good white liberals listening? Hey, do we have any black immigrants listening? Hey, do we have any black women who still identify with feminism even at this late date listening? Come on, we got to talk about the last female survivor. It's all about black women. Why do we always talk about black men? Actually, we talk about black men and black women equally when it comes to slavery. We mentioned Harriet Tubman. We mentioned Sally Hemings. We mentioned Sojourner Truth. So you can get out of here with all of that black women are left out crap. Black women are mentioned as often, if not more, than black men. But you got white people, too many of y'all listen to, and that because what you're really listening to is, well, these white folks, I got a chance to get in good with them, they pay me some attention, so I'll say yes to whatever they say because it's them saying it. That's what it really is, and they know it. They know the buttons that they're pushing, and you know the buttons too. So yeah, everyone's getting exposed. Everybody's getting called out on this. White power has taught the public a whole litany of lies and talking points that they can use to dodge, deflect, distract from where their prosperity came from. So they gotta face up to it. It's the white media has taught the public all sorts of lying talking points. And the main one that they've used is that slavery continued afterwards. Everything you named from slavery continued afterwards. The only difference was it went from being a private sector institution to a public sector one. If anything, the government's culpability in our oppression increased after 1865, not decreased. And whatever was done to black folks on those plantations continued to be done afterwards and done to their descendants. So no, you don't get to say that, well, it's only become 1865. The only thing you make a claim to is what happened on the plantations. Every time black folks made a claim, they were told in court, we don't care how much of a claim you got, we're not hearing it. And when we talk about public-private partnerships, nowhere is this odious, incestuous white alliance more apparent than when it comes to the white media and the white government, the propaganda arm and the administrative arms of white supremacy. Because the propaganda arm every day indoctrinates people with the lie that, well, reparations can only be valid for the specific person who was wronged. Now, if this was an auto manufacturer's defect, or if it was an industrial polluter who contaminated the groundwater in the town where you grew up, that would be one thing. But what happened with slavery, this was something that was done to an entire class of people nationwide. It wasn't something that happened just to whoever bought a freaking Peugeot or whoever brought a freaking Nova, whoever bought a Ford Pinto. This wasn't something that just happened to people, say, in Flint, Michigan. This was something that was done to an entire class of people nationwide, wherever they lived, whoever they were, not by benefit of what car you bought or what neighborhood you lived in, but specifically based on the color of your skin and who you were descended from. Oh, you were descended from these folks who we held in bondage? Well, we're going to make sure that you remain in an oppressive position. We're going to make sure that you remain completely and thoroughly disadvantaged. Oh, all that wealth that we got as a result of your enslavement, that becomes generational, and we have to find a way to fix and block generational poverty onto you. Our generational prosperity is going to be the result of your generational poverty. And it was not the result of anything that somebody accidentally did. Ford accidentally missed some of their quality control when it came to those Pintos and those exploding gas tanks. Oh, well, it was an accident that the Flint Reservoir accidentally used water from an old, nasty sewage facility. All of that corroded water that they used, all that toxic water that they pumped through the pipes, well, that was an accident. Well, it wasn't a damn thing accidental about slavery. It wasn't a damn thing accidental about Jim Crow or segregation or the black codes or systematic hyper-incarceration of black folks. Nothing accidental about that at all. This was the policy of a geopolitical entity. This was not the policy of one corporation or the action of a couple of odious town officials in one little hamlet. And not even one that collapsed and went away. It would be one thing if the United States was like the Soviet Union. If the United States collapsed in 1989, it would be one thing, but that didn't happen. The same government that enslaved us, the exact same government who legislated punishments for any black person who refused to be a slave and punishments for anyone who helped black people to escape slavery, who declared that we are not even 3/5 human beings, which, by the way, is still law. The 14th Amendment didn't change that. The same government who declared that a black person has no rights that a white man is bound to respect, that government still exists today. The United States government was not conquered by some foreign power. The United States government did not cease to exist. It didn't collapse or otherwise break up or go away. That government is still around and more powerful than it's ever been. This is a government which on countless occasions has used its military to deprive black people in this country, those of us who came out of slavery. It used its military in order to deprive us of our property, to deprive us of our freedom, and even our lives. And all this after the alleged end of slavery. Look what happened with the destruction of the Tulsa branch of the Black Wall Street. U.S. government's army who did that. And you see it all the way to the present, what was going on in Ferguson and Baltimore. They bring in the U.S. Army in order to enforce black subjugation. This ain't some handful of white marauders who nobody knows where they came from. They had hoods over their heads. This was the freaking U.S. Army that they called in. The plantations may have been what happened to Sylvester McGee and Redoshi, but slavery has happened to every single generation of us since 1609. This country's absolute abject barbarism against those of us brought to this hellhole didn't stop in 1865, and the debt that is owed to us did not end with Redoshi or Sylvester McGee either. Their deaths did not close the book on American slavery. Their deaths did not mark the end of any possible claim to reparations. If anything, it reinforced that claim and made it more urgent that it occurred. That's something I want to make sure that you understand. If the white media, the white government, or any white people, especially the pukes who run YouTube, call themselves trying to find some excuse, you ain't going to find one. USA Today is not going to be allowed to try to fool people and lie to people and insinuate that the last survivor of slavery died 80 plus years ago, which is what they're really trying to get across. At least to white viewers, white readers, that's what they would take away from it. That's the only thing that would be of interest to them. That's what they instinctively will look for. Oh, you're talking about survivor of slavery. Oh, you got film of her. When did she die? How long ago was that? Oh, 1937. Wow. Jeez, that was the Great Depression. Come on. Playing some game of chronology, that's not going to work. You don't dodge the debt owed by trying to use cop-outs like, I didn't own any slaves. Well, neither did John Adams, but that didn't stop him from opposing the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, he was the guy, the infamous Chief Justice, who presided over the Dred Scott decision, and he was the one who said a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. Well, he didn't personally own slaves either. Did you know that? Oh, he was racist as the day was long, obviously. But Chief Justice Taney, he didn't personally own any slaves. Now, his father did, and he personally benefited from the practice of slavery, even though he didn't own any slaves, and clearly that attitude was passed on to him. He internalized it and carried it on. And Taney's attitude perfectly mirrors the mendacious and duplicitous attitude of the society where anti-black racism is concerned. As long as it's a white man we're talking about and his victims are black, then there's always going to be a ready excuse to explain away his crimes. There's always going to be some half-assed excuse to say, well, it wasn't as bad as all that. If he was a slave owner, then he was a man of his time. And if he wasn't a slave owner, well, he didn't have anything to do with slavery anyway, so he's not responsible. That's what they drag out for Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms and all of the rest of the racists and rednecks. They always drag that one out. Well, you can't say that he's responsible. He had nothing to do with slavery. Yeah, and every time you look up, he's trying to put forward all sorts of legislation and policies that mirror the black codes, or rather the slave codes, because that's what the black codes were. It was nothing more than a renaming of the slave codes of the 19th and 18th centuries. Well, this guy, sure, he should put easy taking these slave codes and put them on the books. But he didn't own any slaves, so, he's not really responsible for that. It's just an attitude problem he's got, that's all. That's what the white liberal tells you. When Taney said that a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect, that also included the first right, which is the right to redress of grievances. They ignored the rightful claims of Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and all the other survivors of the plantations who demanded recompense. And was it because these black people had not been wronged? Was it because they had no case? Was it because they could not prove damages? No, it's because of white fiat. Stop acting as if these white supremacists have some sense of fair play, because they don't. It's part of the reason why all this garbage about status correction needs to stop. Black folks talk about status correction. In order for any want to support status correction. What is that based on? That idea of status correction is based on a supposition that has no basis in fact, a supposition that is merely a fever dream of your own decrepit imagination. That the white supremacists who run this country and have run the world for quite a long time now, that these guys have some inherent sense of fair play, and they don't. You did not sign some document that got you into slavery, so how the hell is a document that you signed with white supremacy supposed to get you out of slavery? The white supremacists understand the game that they're playing. The white supremacist has never signed an agreement with anyone that he's honored. Not with the Native Americans, not with the Asians, not even with other white people. He understands that the world he set up is not governed by justice, it is governed by force or the credible threat thereof. And that force comes in many forms, political force, social force. When it comes to black folks, the most violent force used against us has been economic force. He understands that. And black folks got to stop making excuses for our refusal to use the means of force that are at our disposal. Political force, social force, whatever role it takes. When it comes to talking white supremacy, everything's on the table. When it comes to black folks, all we ever hear is you're living in the past, forget the past. Meanwhile, white folks are constantly making movies, TV shows, and writing books and essays, lectures about their past. They wallow in their past, they drown in their past, they saturate themselves and us in their past, fiction though it is. Yet when it comes to black folks, all of a sudden, stop living in the past, buddy. What they really need is stop reminding them of what they owe you. Stop reminding them of the wrongs they committed against you. That's what it really means. Because that's what our history in the clutches of white supremacy has been. It has been one non-stop crime against us. And the criminals want us to stop reminding them. No chance, drop dead and go to hell. You will never be allowed to forget about the greatest crime in human history, the fact that you carried it out. And the white media is not going to give you some BS talking points that you can use. You ain't talking your way out of this debt. The society has been successfully conditioned by the white media to use their asinine deflections that reparations aren't valid because the survivors are all dead, which that line only gets brought up when it comes to black folks here in the United States. When it comes to black folks in the U.S., well, you can't pay reparations to people who are dead when you pay reparations to the survivors. The time. The Jews prove how false that claim is, as did the Native Americans and the Japanese. What you see here is the white media attempting to promote yet another of their endless string of false narratives that the last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade died in the 1930s, and they make sure to include that prominently and to repeat it. They want to make sure you get that. Never know she won't. She died a long time ago. This is meant to reinforce the lie that reparations are only applicable to those who were imprisoned on the plantations. You better stop talking that stupid talk yourselves. That is an invalid lie, and you're supposed to treat it as the lie that it is. This is the white media trying to push back the date of what they would try to falsely define as a legitimate claim for reparations. They try to push the date back as far as possible. It's like Alexandria Cortez. Hey, let's talk about reparations. Well, only if Hispanics are included. How the hell you figure that, woman? Well, you know, reparations are really about social issues. What happened to black folks was not a social issue, it was a racial one, specific to us. Well, reparations should start in the 1930s with FDR. You see, in the 1930s is when it should start. It should include everybody except for black people. See, this is splitting the zone with lies, if I may use a sports analogy. The ideas create noise. It's not a matter of trying to forward one particular lying narrative. With the white media, it's best to just throw as many lying narratives in there as possible. You're trying to muddy the waters. You're trying to create as much noise as possible. A constant din, a constant storm of, well, what about this? What about that? In the 1930s, in the 19th century, FDR, what about that? Oh, this was over here. That's the idea. Just try to throw everything in there. Try to drown out the narrative, the coherent, irresistible narrative that the new voices of black media have been successfully promoting. Just make it where everybody sounds off on reparations and make it where reparations is an issue. we'll sound off on it, and we'll just drown you Negroes out. That's what the white media is attempting to do. But before they can do that, they got to try to lay the foundation for this would-be strategy. And that's where Hiroshi comes in. Because the way they wrote this piece to set up a number of their little sub-strategies. First strategy is the one that's supposed to appeal to the white majority in this country, which is, well, let's just say that any claims of slavery ended in the 1930s. If there was going to be a claim, it should have been made in the 1930s. Too late now, you know. This way, white people and their non-white flunkies can say, well, the last person who would have had a claim to reparations died in the 30s, so what can you do? This country doesn't owe anyone anything. You know, you Negroes, your condition is your own fault. It surely can't be anything the white people have done. But there's also another ulterior motive for bringing up this Hiroshi woman in particular. The white media has a fallback position when it comes to their lies. They make sure that their lies work on multiple levels. If they can't stop reparations, then they'll do what they did with affirmative action. Make it for everyone, which means that the economic gap, which is where the financial economic violence against black people, that's where the rubber meets the road. The economic gap. Everyone else is going to be given $10 while black folks, some black folks might get 25 cents. And that's the entire point. Maintain that gap between foundational black Americans and everyone else. That's the goal. And the white media is pushing that. They're trying to set that up. They know exactly what they're doing. They're thinking that they're going to set that up. If they can't stop reparations, if we stay on our square and successfully push this through and make it where this issue becomes a make or break proposition for at least one of the major parties, the white media is like, okay, we're going to have to do something, some half-baked sort of measure. We'll say that it's reparations, but it's clearly not. But we're going to make sure that whatever it is, we're going to make sure it's for everyone, because we need black folks to understand that you're going to face maximum resistance from white supremacy. Well, we already know that. And they are going to face maximum persistence from us. They want to use black immigrants as the thin end of the wedge in this case. And that's the reason why they mentioned that Hiroshi was born in Africa. Because that's supposed to be something that any of the Caribbeans, or the Haitians, or the African immigrants, they read that and see that, and that's supposed to make their hearts go pitter-pat. They threw in that Africa reference. That they want to make it clear, well, she was born in Africa. And this is something the white supremacists have used black immigrants for a long time now. The handful of black immigrants are supposed to be used as a convenient straw man for white supremacy, so they can point to the one or two black immigrants who they allow to have a university job, or who they allow to have some corporate managerial post. They can say, well, see, these black people are doing well, so there's no racism. And isn't that the line that they've been using? Is that not precisely the talking point that they've been using? There's only a handful of black immigrants, comparatively speaking. I'm talking, forget about in comparison to the majority of the society as a whole. I mean, comparison to black folks in America. How many black folks in America came out of the killing fields of the American South? And how many of them came over here on a boat from some island or another continent? You can't compare the two. And yet that's exactly what white power has attempted to create a false comparison. I told you about Amy Chua's book. Amy Chua was that woman who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Moms, or whatever the hell that crap was. Well, she wrote another book with her husband, some Jewish guy whose name escapes me at the moment. The book was named The Triple Package. I did a whole video essay about that crap, where she was praising and extolling the superiority of whites and Asians. That's what the book was about. It was basically talking about how the Chinese deserved to run the Philippines, because the Filipinos were just not able to handle their own affairs. And well, you've got ruling classes everywhere you see, except the problem is, when it comes to most of the world, these ruling classes in these other countries that Amy Chua was trying to talk about, they're usually nothing more than sock puppets of white power. She tried to talk about some groups in Kenya, ethnic groups in Kenya, or what have you. Kenya is nothing more than a colony of Britain. In fact, it practically is a colony, because they still consider themselves to be subjects of the British Crown. But that's something that Amy Chua doesn't tell you, and she's not going to tell you because that's how propaganda is. Propaganda is not meant to educate, it's meant to indoctrinate. And her book, which was a half-baked maneuver to cover up the obvious race baiting, she tried to shoehorn Nigerians into her book. Why? Look at the Nigerians in the United States, you see. Well, you see, it's... Now, never mind the fact that, as I covered before my video essay about this book, one of the main things she tried to point to is culture. Culture's only their code word for race. You hear from the white supremacists all the time, whether it's Milo Snuffleupagus or BS, Ben Shapiro. These clowns like to use the word culture as a synonym for race, or as a pseudonym for race. That's supposed to be just their way of saying race by another term. Okay, well, if you try to claim that it's their culture, what culture do those of us who came out of American slavery have? Our names were taken away, our African culture taken away, our language, and words are the most important means of holding on to one's culture because it happens to help define the currency of thought. I've always said that words are the currency of thought. And when you have words that have a particular definition, you're linking people to a particular mindset, or whatever hell mindset we have stripped away from us by force. Radoshi was not called Radoshi. Her name, when she got here, was Sally Smith. So we had our culture taken away from us. Our thought process taken away from us. Our loyalty system taken away from us. Our knowledge of the past taken away from us. Our folk ways, mores, and African minds taken away from us. So what culture do we have? We have a culture that says black is inferior. Look at the dictionary. A culture that says a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. A culture where the founding document of the law of the land says that anyone who looks like a black person is only 3/5 a human being. Amy Chua says nothing about that. The culture that we have is the white supremacist indoctrination. That's the culture that we've got. A culture that does not tell us how great we are. By the way, you read Amy Chua's little crappy book, The Triple Package, and at no point does she mention that. The very crux of her book, which is that you don't have superior races, you have superior cultures. And then she only goes on to mention white ones and Asian ones. And she mentions the Nigerians simply to give her some rhetorical cover. And the first thing that you say is, wait a minute, what culture do black folks in the United States have? They don't have a culture of their own because their names are not even their own. So doesn't that prove, okay, well that does prove that black folks are clearly an exception to this rule, and you need an exceptional answer for this exceptional circumstance, right? Amy Chua doesn't even discuss it. Because the whole point of propaganda is not to give answers. It is to try to justify a pre-existing policy. But she only gave a single one-and-done, blink-and-you'll-miss-it reference to the Nigerians, and it was her little would-be deflection. It was so ham-handed, so blatantly insincere, that even other Asians called Amy Chua out on it. Even Cenk Uygur, undercover bigot that he is, even he had to call her out on it and say, you put the Nigerians in there just to give yourself cover. Even he had to throw that. Even he had to say it. And when Cenk Uygur, of all people, as scumbag that he is, when he feels compelled to say, come on, I gotta call a flag on the play, it's pretty obvious what you did, that's when you know you done messed up. But understand, these black immigrants are a tiny handful of the total black population in the U.S., but they serve a very crucial, important function under white supremacy. They're not letting in too many of these black migrants. I would love to say that they're the slowest growing demographic in the country, but they're not growing at all. So that being the case, white power is looking at going, all we got to do is to move this slow-moving genocide forward as we increase the economic strangulation on the black folks who came out of American slavery. As the foundational black Americans are progressively starved for resources, we will up the propaganda by pointing to these black immigrants and saying, well, look at these guys. Hey, there's some executive at NBC, and she's a Nigerian American, and there's some other guy over here at CNN, and there's some person at this publishing house, and there's this university professor. Hey, Kamala Harris's father is from Jamaica, don't you know? Well, look, these black immigrants, they seem to be doing fine. We don't know what's wrong with these guys, these foundational black Americans over here. We don't know what the hell's wrong with them. But clearly the system's working. It must be these guys. Because all these other black folks over here, they're doing just fine. We know because we paid them off and singled them out. We went ahead and put them on the payroll. And we're not putting any others on the payroll. It will be damned if we let any more of these Haitians or these Jamaicans in here. We have rolled up the drawbridge. So that's the game that they're playing. It's going to be a game of strangle the majority of black folks in this country for resources, which is the main means by which genocides are carried out, resource deprivation. And then when it comes to these black immigrants, well, for them, their numbers will be contained because we can use the white media to make it where people go, well, these black folks may be dying out, but hey, these black immigrants are doing fine, and hey, it can't be about race. Otherwise, why wouldn't we be singling out these black immigrants too? It's the game that they're playing. USA Today put out this story. They have the third largest circulation of any daily newspaper in the country. You know that they didn't just decide out of the blue that slavery was a fascinating topic today. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke taught, this is out there because white power wants it out there. That's what you got to understand when it comes to the white media. What you think that when you look at the nightly news, the midday news, or CNN or whatever, you think that when they put a story in front of you, it's because you had some group of white folks sitting around in an editorial meeting deciding that this is the most important issue of the day. Like hell. The news media is no different than any other show that the white media puts on. It happens to be prepared, presented, packaged, and pushed to you like any other media product. No different than the latest episode of Law and Order. Who gives a damn? That's how the white media works at the news level too. They're not reporting all the news that's fit to print. They're reporting whatever is fit for white power. That's what they're doing. And you need to understand that. Do not let them lie to you and make you think that, oh, this issue, well, this Radoshi woman is just so interesting. All of a sudden, why is the white media talking about this now? Because we're talking about it. We took the initiative, and we have been driving the narrative and the events, and we left the white media in the dust. We let those bastards in the dust, and they've been scrambling to catch up ever since. The white power trying to catch up to us and get out in front of this one. They're trying to get out in front of this whole black empowerment / reparations narrative. They're trying to get out in front of tangibles because they know that reparations is a thin wedge. And they're trying to break that wedge as soon as possible or take the hammer away from us with whatever they can do. They're trying to mislead and misdirect and take us off course. Because as I've always taught you, white power believes in duality. Not merely because they're a bunch of full-time liars, but because of the fact they understand duality is a strong tool when it comes to slavery. Just the technique of creating a false association in people's minds, that's what helped W kick off the war in Iraq. He would use the term Iraq and Saddam Hussein, or 9/11 and Saddam Hussein, or Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein constantly in the same sentences to the point that people thought that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. And then when he was pushed on the issue in front of the world, George Bush had to admit there is no evidence that Iraq had anything to do with the September 11th attacks. Yeah, but it didn't matter. Once they got into Iraq, once they had access to the oil, they were controlling the oil, which oil was really about. How come the war in Iraq's going so poorly? Well, who said it's going poorly? You seem to think that the entire idea is that Iraq is supposed to be a pacified, prosperous democracy. White supremacy does not care to create a competition with itself. Iraq is in precisely the conditions they want Iraq in. They want Iraq to be in a perpetual state of destabilization. That way the oil comes to the Koch brothers or whomever easy and cheap, and there is no indigenous homegrown authority there who's going to mess with it. Because when you look at Venezuela and how Hugo Chavez bent the Koch brothers over and gave them heave-ho, and how Nicolas Maduro is saying, no, forget it, I'll nationalize the oil fields. That's what happens when you don't have a destabilized government. When you got a government that's actually able to set policy and set prices. You see this article about slavery and about this Radoshi woman, and some of y'all think, finally, the white media is talking about slavery again. They are never going to be putting out stories that are meant to help enhance black empowerment or to push black empowerment or to promote black empowerment. They're not about slavery, you better have on your skeptic goggles, which is nothing more than common sense. These are the people who have been cheerleading for black lynchings. Go back and read what was happening during the lynchings. The white media was the main one saying, well, Jimmy Smith over there, he put his hands on some white women and some virtuous white men brought this vile Negro to justice. The white media has been cheerleading lynchings from time immemorial. Same way that they did with Trayvon Martin, same way that they did with Mike Brown, same way that they did with Oscar Grant, same way that they did with Eric Garner, same way that they did with Freddie Gray. Every time you look up a black man's getting killed, white people decide they're going to murder a black person, the white media comes along and explains, this is the reason why that nigger deserved to die. They have not changed their strategy one iota since the 19th century, and they're not going to. Black folks see an article like this, and they think, well, at least the white media is talking about slavery again. Oh, this is helpful to us somehow. You're not sure how it is, but you think it's helpful. Talking about slavery ain't the point. The point is what's going to be done to make up for slavery to those of us who survived it. What the hell is going to be done to make this right? And the only thing that can be done to make it right is to cut the check. Because when white people look at an article like this, the thing that they take away from it is, so the last survivor of slavery died in the 1930s. Well, now we know what to say specifically whenever someone talks about reparations. That's what white folks take away from the story. They read it for the sake of trying to figure out, can you discredit this woman, or can we minimize it? Oh, it happened, she died 80 plus years ago. Well, you're not going to put that on white folks. Well, you see, she may have had a claim, but you Negroes today, you guys don't. And by the way, black immigrants, these foreign-born black people who are their children, like Joy Reid and Roly-Poly Martin and Angela Rye with lettuce and tomatoes on the side, they can read something like this and say, hey, this Redoshi woman was born in Africa. Well, I or my parents were born in the Congo or born in wherever, and we came here too, just like she did, so we're no different than her. Hey, this reparations thing, this really ought to include those of us who had nothing to do with American slavery, because Redoshi, she was born in Africa. Well, you're not going to forget about the part about how she went to the killing fields in the U.S., right? Yeah, you make sure to mention that too. Well, she was born in Africa. That's the important thing. Why are you trying to drive divisions? By the way, family, do you know who I just described? Joy Reid. Neither of Joy Reid's parents went through slavery in the U.S., but damned if she ain't going to pretend like she can speak for us, though, huh? Damned if she ain't going to decide that, well, I'm the responsible black person. Well, you see, I come from a different viewpoint than you guys, and I went to a good school, and it's not your fault that you guys are a bunch of ignorant wouts. It's racism's fault, but I'm best suited to speak for black folks because, I just got a better education, and I'm using that education to speak up for black people, see? And that's the same crap that Angela Rye tries to pull. That's the attitude of superiority that these bastards have. That, they got to hang around some white folks at a white university, and they got their white education and their white talking points and their white job at some white company where they got their white pals who are giving them a white paycheck, and because of that makes them best suited to speak for black people. Because they're just so black, you see. They're so rooted in black, you see. Yeah, white power chooses its flunkies well, but then again, it's not too hard to find some black flunkies for white power. Tragically, we got a lot of black folks lining up to see if there's any bootleg jobs, any bootleg positions left.
Watch out!
But at the end of the propaganda piece, they throw in a quote from this Hannah Durkin woman, the white woman from England.
Nice to see you.
She wrote a research paper about an African enslaved in the U.S., and what she says is, sadly, we still haven't begun to reckon with the injustices of transatlantic slavery and its legacies. Redoshi's story is a reminder that transatlantic slavery is part of our very recent history, and hopefully it allows us to finally reclaim or at least reflect on the story of Redoshi and the countless women like her. Now, let's deal with this last bit first. This Durkin woman says, we haven't means white people. They're the ones who haven't reckoned with the injustices of what they and their forefathers and their descendants have done. Those of us who are the survivors of slavery, we deal with it every freaking minute of every day. We have been the only ones who have reckoned with it. Secondly, she does the same old intentionally vague lip service about slavery and its legacies. Now, I know that will sound good to some of you because you're so desperate for a white person to give even the slightest acknowledgement that our oppression has continued long after the cotton fields. But the problem is that's all that this white woman did. She gave the slightest acknowledgement to it. And to me, to have some person come along and decide that they would take the greatest crime in human history and that they would just gloss over it like that, to me that's sprinkling sugar on crap. She wants to have it both ways. She wants to be able to say transatlantic slavery is part of our recent history. And that's about the only sensible thing that she said. Yes, this is part of recent history, but it's also part of current events. And that's what needs to be said. Don't talk about it as merely history. Don't try to compartmentalize it. This is still going on. What happened to Radoshi has continued to happen. So for her to try to get on her moral high horse and say that it's part of recent history, but not to acknowledge that it's still going on, I see what the hell she's doing, and you need to see it too. To mention the legacy of slavery only in passing, that's to treat the black codes, Jim Crow segregation, and the systematic hyper-incarceration and economic destruction of our people as if it was just a small thing. Well, we don't want to dwell on it because it wasn't that important. When our degradation, anti-black racism is the central issue of the day. It is the only issue that matters. Iraq, Afghanistan, so-called global warming, whether it's real or phony, I'm more concerned about the economic destruction of my people because that's the issue that matters. You make it where the survivors of slavery have economic power in their hands. A lot of these other issues are going to start to get ironed out because it's going to be very difficult for you to be pushing for wars in foreign countries where you got some black power brokers who are saying, you know what, we're going to use our mainstream media that reaches tens of millions of people every single day and tell folks the real truth of what this latest push for some war in some foreign country is about. Going to be kind of difficult for American imperialism to persist when you got black folks, the main ones who have been on the business end of the white whip for the last 500 years. When you got black folks in a position to come to the big table of power and start to deal, as to start to make some power moves and to stop some of these agendas, because your white liberals damn sure ain't doing it. If they were going to do it, they'd have done it by now. But there's another crime that this Durkin woman committed here, worse than merely brushing past the issue. She didn't even have the decency to mention reparations. And that's going to be the key issue. We're going to condition these bastards that if you are not advocating for reparations, then you are one of the anti-black racists who needs to be spotlit and called out. Oh, well, I forgot. Well, we ain't going to forget about you, Anna Durkin. If you mention slavery and do not mention reparations, then that makes you part of the problem. To say that slavery brought subsequent issues, that slavery had a legacy, but to not also acknowledge that this reality makes reparations as valid now as it's ever been, that is to deny it altogether. That's what she did. She was denying reparations by the side door. But of course, to discuss the remedy to the oppression of our people, that wasn't the reason the USA Today put this propaganda piece out. And finally, that line about Radoshi and women like her, because white people are still trying to figure out if that black feminist horse still has a few more miles left in it. That's why they got to throw that in. She knew exactly what she was doing, and USA Today knew what she was doing too. This will be a norm of white media coverage of slavery, by the way, and of the white elections. They already understand that basically black men as a group have pretty much solidified and gotten on code and forget about all this garbage because black men have been the ones most affected by the hyper-incarceration state. Black women have been affected too, to be sure, but black men have been the main ones who the white police state has been aiming its guns and its prison cells at. So the white media that do all these puff pieces in the 80s and 90s, psychologically masturbating black women, now that they've been a little less friendly, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to see if they can do this pivot. We're going to pivot back to girls rule the world, and you go girl, and black girls rock, and that's what this is about. We're going to start psychologically, we're going to start diddling black women's egos again. We're going to see if this gets them back on board. This Durkin woman, in addition to being a propped-up tool of white power calling herself speaking for us, when you look at her bio on the Newcastle University website, what you see as far as her current research, that tells you everything you need to know about her. She's working on a book project. Notice that the research paper wasn't an excerpt from her manuscript. She didn't even have the decency to do a manuscript. But her book project is going to examine black and Jewish women's contributions to mid-century ethnographic and autobiographical writing, cinema, and modern dance. Think about that. This woman is a lecturer on film and media. But where the hell's her documentary at about any of these black folks? And her current book project is about black and Jewish women's contributions. This woman, this is not some black advocate, not even a white liberal black advocate. She's just a white feminist. She goes on to write, I show how ethnographic film became a key device for black and Jewish women seeking to revise racialized and gendered scientific and cultural paradigms. There you go. There you go. Seeking to revise racialized and gendered paradigms. Yeah, we all know who the gender applies to, and it ain't white women. Well, if we're going to be talking about ethnographic film, especially in the early 20th century, why we can't leave out all of the Jewish executives who own the movie studios. We can't leave out such Jewish ethnographic films as Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. See, Al Jolson was Jewish. He did more than most to be promoting blackface. In fact, that's what The Jazz Singer was about this Jewish guy who apparently has spent too much time around the Smartses. And this is what he comes up with as his kind of lopsided homage. So I wonder why Miss Durkin doesn't feel... I just have to wonder if she would feel the need to go ahead and include Al Jolson in that, because we're going to be talking about Jewish ethnographic film contributions. Well, at the very least, we should include the jazz. Who were the good Jewish film executives? What were these studios doing while black people were not able to even be in front of a movie camera for any of these Jewish-owned and Jewish-run movie studios? I wonder if Mrs. Durkin ever tackles that. Does she show any of these good Jewish women who decide to tackle that issue? It's a fair question. Then she writes, I then show how these women, excluded by sexual and racial barriers from pursuing conventional academic careers, etc. Notice how we went from racialized and gendered paradigms to sexual and racial barriers. So she went from mentioning race first, which would have meant that black women were the primary subject of her would-be book, to sexual first, which, as a good white feminist means, that's code for white women. Notice how she did the switcheroo like that? That's what this Hannah Durkin woman is. An agent of white supremacy coming to pimp the feminist line and see if there are any black women willing to take the bait. And I didn't highlight it, but in her little bio here, she writes, I map for the first time the creative techniques that they, I assume she's talking about Jewish and black women, because let's be honest here, she's putting Jewish first. She says that she's mapping these techniques for the first time. I like that. You got this white woman who's calling herself being some sort of pioneer of black people's history. Because when she talks about what it is that she's mapping, it's nothing but black communities in the U.S., South, the Caribbean, and Africa. And I thought it was a joke that she talks about to facilitate cross-cultural exchange. No, our culture has been raped, has been robbed, has been plundered by white power, by white people like Mrs. Durkin. There was no cross-cultural exchange. What the hell do we get from these white people who are sitting here ripping off ragtime, ripping off jazz, ripping off blues, ripping off our dance, ripping off our slang, ripping off our style? What the hell do we get in exchange? What did they give us in exchange? Please tell me what the hell did we get? We already know what they took from us, so what was this exchange about? What did white people exchange with us? The lynchings, the fire hoses, the attack dogs, the church burnings with our children inside by a ad, dragging people behind cars. What the hell exchange was there that she's talking about? So yeah, that's what this Hannah Durkin woman is, a white feminist, showing up calling herself going to be the mouthpiece for black folks and pushing the white feminine line to see if there's anyone still dumb enough to take a bite, anyone still dumb enough to bite that line. But just like the mythical black-brown alliance or black-yellow alliance, we got these would-be black Jewish allies who are doing nothing more than using our struggle, our history as a springboard to promote themselves. And yeah, if you look at the excerpt here from her bio, she also says that her doctorate, which is now a forthcoming book, examines the international film careers and writings of Josephine Baker, who we've all heard of, and Catherine Dunham. Wonder if she's related to Lena Dunham, who nobody's heard of. And by the way, this kind of stuff, this is nothing more than a white woman who's looking for some sort of contract with the white media corporation, maybe a mini-series or a movie or something. That's what she's doing. Hopefully her book will form the basis for an HBO mini-series. That's probably what she's fishing for. But again, you have one of these would-be allies who's doing nothing more than trying to use us as a means to amplify and promote themselves. They will interject feminism into the discussion because we, black people as a group, are speaking in one voice. And they're going to start trying to see if there are any stress fractures or divisions that they can capitalize on. And they're not going to be doing it just one time. Expect to see this repeatedly. And expect to see some people who previously hadn't been talking about feminism and black patriarchy and all the rest of that crap. Expect to see a lot of these morons coming out of the woodwork saying that garbage. They understand that when they see the white media, the best way to get some crumbs from the white media's table is to talk like them. So when they see a white media puff piece get put out there, or a white media propaganda piece, they start looking at the words that are used, the phrases that are used. Okay, I'm going to start dropping those phrases to let white power know that I want a paycheck from them too. I want some crumbs too. Expect to see that crap. Some of y'all were surprised when Big Bird, whoever that clown was, who claimed that he was part of a legitimate reparations group. Yeah, a legitimate reparations group that ain't produce a damn thing. Because under white supremacy, that's what a legitimate reparations group is. Legitimate reparations groups are groups that don't do anything, that don't move the needle, that don't push the issue forward. Legitimate reparations groups are ones who make reparations invalid and a non-issue. Expect to see the white media promoting more of these clowns that you never heard of. Yeah, this one came from a white woman, but the next one will be coming from a black person. And they're going to be capitalizing on Hannah Durkin's complete refusal to acknowledge reparations. They'll be saying that reparations should have been for those who were in slavery. Expect to see some Negroes get bold saying that. And they're not going to be coming from the political right. The white media knows what they got to do. They got to get some black folks who you would think would know better, get them to say, well, we got to minimize this, don't you know? And they'll be doing it under the guise of a black-brown alliance. Alexandria Cortez, she was talking about reparations beginning in the 1930s. Well, there were a lot of people. It's about white supremacy, you see. It's about racism, you see. White power knows what they're doing. It's about maintaining the economic gap, you see. They don't mind you calling out white supremacy or white power or racism as long as you're not doing anything that's going to change it. You can take rhetorical pot shots at them all day long. You can get in a couple of verbal digs all day long. But if you're not talking about fundamental fundamentally balancing the economic scales, then you ain't hitting on nothing. You're not changing anything. White power is only concerned with what's going to change its position in the world. These white media pieces that are going to be calling themselves trying to otherwise highlight black women, that's them talking to black women, and they hope that they're talking to black women. They want black women to see that, and it's, hey, we're gonna dangle this black woman in front of you, black females, and you're gonna start listening to us again, right? You're gonna start hearing, because we know that's all it takes, right?
Good God!
Maybe black women won't respond to the feminine overture the first time, but maybe they'll respond the 10th time or the 30th time. That's what the white media is banking on, because they're not going to be doing this just once. Some black females are going to see this and think, oh, finally they're recognizing black women. If your freaking ego takes over and your pathetic, emaciated psychology just takes over, where you think to yourself that I don't mind if my enemy is trying to set me up for the mother of all whammies, as long as they're acknowledging me. I just want them to acknowledge me. If you sit around waiting for your enemy to acknowledge you, then that makes you part of the problem. Slavery didn't happen just to black men or just to black women. It happened to us all. There should be neither light nor air between us on that fact. You want to know why it was that slavery was eventually brought to an end? Is because you had women like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth who told those white suffragists of the 19th century to kick rocks. Those white suffragists showed up as the tools of white supremacy, the agents of white supremacy in the 19th century, trying to figure out how do we get black women off of this thing. But Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and others remembered, hey, who was it who gave birth to and raised that wicked white man who's running white supremacy? Oh, it's these white women over here who did it. See, Harriet Tubman wasn't looking for a place sitting at the table with some white women so she could feel like she was an honorary white woman. Same thing for Sojourner Truth. In the 19th century, black women had their heads on straight as a group. And no amount of white women showing up with their fake camaraderie was going to change that. They understood what it was, what it's got to be. They understood when white supremacy was trying to figure out how to divide and conquer. You see, there was no humiliation. There was no degradation that black women suffered, that black men did not also suffer as well. If you want to try to pull well, black women were raped on the plantations. Well, black men were castrated and lynched a hell of a lot more. One was a violation, the other was a violation, a mutilation, and fatal. White people know that black folks suffer from ego starvation, and we love having our fragile, emaciated egos catered to by white daddy and white mommy. They're testing us with stuff like this. They want to see if we've lost our appetite for white approval yet. Because they know that that's what at the core of Willie Lynch and the post-traumatic slave disorder and all the rest of these psychological hang-ups and disturbances that we have is the fact that at the end of the day, we still want white mommy and white daddy to pat us on the head because we've been conditioned to look to them for all things. And they want to see, they're testing, has the psychological conditioning broken? Well, with enough of us, it has.
Hello.
And if trying to get a pat on the back or get your ego diddled by white power, if that's what you're looking for, then you ain't with me, and you won't be allowed to be with me. This hit piece was meant to push a lot of buttons. And we better be aware of the buttons that they're trying to push. We better call out their tactics and the people using them. Neither USA Today nor this white woman wrote this article in order to do us any favors. They're trying to use our ancestors' stories, the stories of the black folks who came out of those plantations, the black folks who walked off those plantations, or in the case of Radoshi, who lingered on there for a few years before finally Massa told her to get lost. Let's just be honest about it. They're trying to use the stories of the slaves themselves and to twist those tales of tragedy and get them to fit the white supremacist agenda, using the stories of the slaves themselves. And it is no coincidence or an accident that they chose this woman to use as their pawn. this entire so-called article was only written because this white woman in England wrote a research paper. That's it. That's the only reason that USA Today put out this speculate bit of nonsense. Because some white woman in England wrote a research paper about it. Not because she wrote a book, by the way. She didn't even have the decency to write a book. All she did was she wrote a research paper. She didn't make a documentary about Radoshi. She just simply wrote a research paper. So the only reason that this article exists is to amplify some white woman's research paper. Say, how many research papers written by black scholars highlighting reparations has USA Today seen fit to use as an article? How many black scholars who have written articles demanding reparations has USA Today decided justified an article? Did they see some? Did they look at anything that has been done or said online and say, well, you know, what these people are doing, this whole movement that they got, this justifies an article? No, they haven't. So you got a group of black folks, young black folks, who crushed a major party would-be candidate, Kamala Harris, crushed her. And the white media's not looking at going, that certainly justifies an article. They're trying to avoid this black empowerment movement like the plague. Because it scares them. It should. This is a harbinger that could very well bring about the very end of white power, along with the system of white giveaways, goodies, and guarantees that undergirds white power. That's the glue holding this house of thieves together. This pack of thieves are held together by their mutual debt pact. We're going to work together to steal, rob, rape, and pillage as much as we can, and then stick together to protect each other from any sort of punishment or from any sort of blood like the plague be. Now, USA Today could have very easily have done a piece on Sylvester McGee, but they didn't. This story is about trying to invent some sort of imaginary window for reparations claims, and to declare that window closed. In other words, the same old white fiat. I'm white and I say so. We're white and we're saying that Radoshi was the last person who was affected by slavery, so as far as we're concerned, she's the last person who we should be talking about. Anything other than that, that just isn't valid. It's also meant as a means to muddy the waters on the discussion. It's so obvious, they might as well have had Bernie Sanders write this piece and ask, well, what about black people outside of the U.S.? Why? Because she was born in Benin. She was born in West Africa, so would she get reparations too? Would her descendants get reparations? By the way, in answer to the white media's pathetic attempted dodge, the answer to a question like that would be yes and yes. It doesn't matter where Radoshi was born. What mattered was she went through the hell of slavery in the United States. Radoshi went through Radoshi did not go through slavery in the Caribbean. She didn't go through slavery in Haiti. She didn't go through slavery in Brazil or Africa or anywhere else. She did not come to the United States after slavery was over. She was brought here like all the other foundational black Americans were. Radoshi and her descendants are without doubt owed the debt of this country because she was one of the ones who suffered during it. There's no confusion at all about who reparations applies to and whom it doesn't apply to. The white media desperately wants to manufacture some sort of confusion. Because, as Upton Sinclair once said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Well, to make it more appropriate to white power, it is very difficult to get a white man to understand something when his power, privilege, and perks depend upon his not understanding it. That's what's going on here. So yeah, they're going to play dumb. And you're going to have some black folks who will play dumb right along with them, but we won't be any of them. White power has given them every crumb of their daily bread. So of course they're going to be defending it. White supremacy is a lie. And you're going to have all these clowns, many of them black, who will be telling nothing but lies to defend it. In a sense, they are genuinely confused, or rather indecisive. They understand precisely the threat that we pose, and they don't know whether to spit or go blind. That's the only confusion going on here. All this talk about who's owed reparations or how would it be structured, that's just them playing stupid. But when it comes to the fact that they're genuinely scared, yeah, and they don't know what to do about it, yeah, that they're not making up. That confusion really is true, and that confusion is genuine. About the only relevant point in this propaganda piece was that Radoshi was the slave of a man named Washington Smith, and this guy apparently owned a plantation in Dallas County, Alabama. And he was also a founder of the Bank of Selma. Now, that's something that I thought was actually salient in the article, something that actually was intelligent. We need to identify the countless corporations who got their seed money from the slave trade, particularly the banks, without whom both the railroads and the telegraph lines would never have happened. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the mid-18th century. That's about the 1750s, 25 years before the Declaration of Independence. But the only reason that Britain had the economic wherewithal to industrialize was because of the unprecedented economic power given to them by their colonies in America, which was the sole result of one factor and one factor alone: 150 years of free black slave labor that Britain was eating off of for free. The white media, and that includes their so-called historians, who I think we can all agree are mostly paid liars, they've spent centuries trying to indoctrinate people about white history, making it sound as if all these slave owners and thieves and mass murderers and rapists and warmongers, they were nothing but a bunch of honest, hard-working men who had some personality flaws, but nothing more serious than that. Why, they were a bunch of hard-working white folks who caught some lucky breaks that were the result of their own hard work dented industry. That's not true at the individual level, and it damn sure ain't true at the group level. Britain's prosperity in the 18th century, that was the sole result of tremendous amounts of hard work, but it wasn't hard work that white folks were doing. It was the hard work of black people, our people. So yeah, out of an entire PS-laden article about the only intelligent thing, I'm kind of surprised that this got past the censors at USA Today. The only intelligent thing that was in the entire article was that Radoshi slave owner used the money that he got from her labor to go ahead and found his own bank. That means that him and his descendants and all of the white people, because they damn sure weren't making loans to black folks, all of the white people who went to the Bank of Selma and got money out of that thing and started their own businesses, they were benefiting from slave labor. Along with all of these other banks and insurance companies that were getting caked off because of foundational black Americans being deprived of our due. So I want you to keep that in mind. White power, the white media is going to be turning up the heat. They're going to be trying to find a way of what's the angle going to be that we're going to use to try to insinuate ourselves into this discussion. First, they have to be able to derange the discussion, redefine the discussion, change the terms of the discussion.
Take whatever I can get.
And what that means is, instead of talking about reparations, instead we're going to be talking about some Radoshi. And we won't spend too much time about what she was doing on the plantation after slavery ended. We're not going to spend too much time dwelling on that. And we're not going to be talking about old Washington Smith and the Bank of Selma and how much money he and his descendants got out of it. We won't be talking about that much either. No, instead what it's going to be about is it's going to be about talking about the black female survivors of the transatlantic slave trade and American slavery in general and American segregation all the way to the present. It's going to be about that. We're going to see if we can use the stories of the slaves themselves, because we see that you guys have caught on to some of our tricks, and we ain't going to be able to get away with some of this stuff we've been doing. So we're going to try some new tack now. We're we're going to try, we know, of course, that why you would never, ever denounce one of the survivors of the plantations. Why you would never do that. You would never say if there's something wrong or that their memories being misused. At least we don't think you would. So we're going to try and see what the response is. Well, what the response is that it's a brand new day. What the response is, if you're talking about slavery without talking about reparations, then what you are doing is you are committing historical and moral blasphemy. You profane and disrespect not merely the memory of Radoshi, but of all of the people who are imprisoned on the plantations, who were violated and who were destroyed and degraded over the course of 250 plus years, and of their survivors all the way to the present. You are no different and no better than Washington Smith nor any other slave owner. That's what the response is. We see what you're doing, white media. We see you, and we are not fooled. Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. About the closest things that white supremacy actually has to principles is moral relativism and situational ethics. And for about the last 24 hours, the racists in Washington have been subjecting us to a grand display of both. Now, before we get to it, allow me to set the table for you.
We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable in U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine.
They say a picture speaks 1,000 words. Certainly true in this case. Biden says that this would deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine. You could tell by how he paused before he said that, and the look on his wrinkled mug as he's going through this. Even he knows this is a crock. Even he's looking to go up. The politics are wrong for this, aren't they? First of all, that his pals have sanctioned proved their economy. The key word there being there. Putin's position has been fireproofed. He and his buddies, the oligarchs, they've stockpiled money to enslave themselves for whatever the U.S. tries to do against them. So you're not taking any money out of Putin's pockets. As for the poor babushkas in the streets of Russia, they're going to suffer. But as we've seen with other regimes like Cuba, Iraq, North Korea, and other places where the U.S. has tried sanctions, the leaders of these nations, they simply divert all resources to the military. In other words, they make sure that the apparatus that's going to keep the people from toppling them gets all the resources to protect them. And then the country becomes dirt poor, but the people won't rise up and topple the government. That's not going to happen. And in the case of Russia, they got China as an ally. India is still friendly with them too. Biden's so-called powerful blow to Putin is actually going to be a powerful blow to the American pocketbook. You're the one who's going to be feeling that powerful blow. The only one who will be suffering from these sanctions is Americans at the pump and at the grocery store and everywhere else. And since everything you eat has to be brought to you on a truck, everything you bought at the store had to be brought to you on a truck, those gas prices are going to show up on everything. Those truck drivers are going to have to pay more. They're going to have to pay more for the oil to lubricate their engines. And that's just transportation. It gets even worse when you talk about manufacturing. Petroleum in the United States is used in practically everything you buy. Everything from aspirin to the seats you sit on to the computer that you're listening to me on. Everything's going to be driven higher as a result of that. So this is going to be compound inflation. No wonder Jim Crow Joe was looking so dour while he was delivering this message. Even he's looking and going, oh God, I'm stepped in and I know it. But the thing is, as I explained to you yesterday, under white supremacy, these racists understand that a very good way to politically insulate themselves, especially during an election year, is to start a war. But what Biden's trying to do is he's trying to have his cake and eat it too. There's going to be everything that normally would go along with a war that's going to be conducted here, but the difference is there's not going to be any American casualties. So as far as he's concerned, there's not going to be any American body bags, no flag-draped caskets coming back on aircraft. As he thinks to himself, this is going to basically be the ability to have all the benefits of saying we are at war, rally behind the flag, rally behind me, and don't nonsense, heroin waste, garbage. Hell, you gotta spot the Ukrainian military. They opened up the Ukrainian military to the neo-Nazis. The neo-Nazis didn't have to sneak in. The Ukrainian government welcomed those neo-Nazis with open arms. You're supposed to have a clear conscience for that, but let me tell you something. That's your definition of a clear conscience. You don't have one. You don't have a conscience at all. And if that's still not enough for you to understand the common sense of it, let me put it this way. Your clear conscience is not going to fill your gas tank, and it won't fill your belly either. Yeah, we stuck it to Putin, but now I can't get to work, and I'm so hungry. Oh, and look, here's one of those volunteers who went to Ukraine a couple of months back. Why is he carrying an AR-15? And why has he got on a Nazi swastika? And why is he looking at me like that? See, I've been following the so-called coverage very closely. You know the one word that I haven't heard the white media use to describe the oil ban or the consequences they're going to follow? I haven't heard the word controversial. They haven't called it a controversial oil ban. Instead, they're saying it's a bipartisan oil ban. And you know what else I haven't heard the white media say? Detrimental to the economy. It's an election year. We ought to be hearing non-stop pontification and speculation from the white media about, man, you're going to have an oil ban with Russia? You know how that's going to hit people in the pocketbook? Gas prices are going to skyrocket along with food prices and everything else. This is an election year. How is this going to impact the outcome of the election? And the election, you see, man, nothing like this really happened during an election year since 1980 or the 70s. They're not doing that this time. No, there's no talk at all from the white media about the long-term economic effects of this either. That we'll be dealing with the aftershocks of this for years. No talk about how this will cripple the economy. No white media giving us pending horror stories about how people are going to have to make a choice between gas, medicine, or food. Not that they'll be able to afford any of those things, because all of them are going to be impacted by this oil ban. Instead, we're being subjected to an across-the-board feel-good glorification of this by people like the folks over at Nothing But Caucasians. They posted some drivel today giving tips on how to get more mileage out of the 2 or 3 drops of gas you may or may not be able to get at the gas station. Because the problem is far greater than merely the cost of gas, though that's certainly a big enough crisis right there. It's also because of the supply of oil. You see, this is all happening on a dime at a moment's notice. It's not as if the U.S. has had the chance to stockpile huge reserves of fuel, or as if the U.S. can just, on a dime, say we need to get the oil from somewhere else and have it show up on time without skipping a beat. It's not like there's some huge reserves of fuel just waiting to replace all that Russian crude that Biden is suddenly rejecting. The white media is making it clear that Russia's the bad guy, and the white media narrative is that you shouldn't be resentful of all the hardship you're going to be facing, because otherwise you're going to fracture our unity, as Joke Reid said. But the feel-good glorification doesn't really stop at feel-good about what you're losing. It's also a matter of we're going to be getting tough too. The United States brutalized Venezuela, economically and physically. The United States, using the State Department, the CIA, they overthrew the Chavez regime, and they did it so they could install a Blanco, white ruling class back in control of Venezuela. Because Chavez made it clear he did not consider himself to be white, and he was going to be putting all that oil money to work for the people of Venezuela, the people who have been left out, the non-whites. You had the oil interests in the U.S. who were saying this guy's got to go. And they overthrew his government, but the people of Venezuela, they rose up, they got Chavez out of that island prison and put him right back in charge again. He was like, oh my God, our little narrative of he's brutalizing the people, we can't be using that anymore. So instead they just said, oh, Chavez and the military. It was the military you see. No, it was the people you see. Since then they've said that Venezuela is a hopeless dictatorship, completely undemocratic. There's no chance for freedom there. Gee, sounds just like the U.S. now, don't it? And then Hugo Chavez, who had previously been in good health, suddenly, out of the blue, was diagnosed with cancer and was dead a couple of months later. Man, that sure was convenient. You see, when Alexander Litvinenko, when he was poisoned by a radioactive isotope, and that gave him, because that's how it's done. You give somebody instant cancer by exposing them to radioactive material. And he's dying in a British hospital, and he's saying it was Vladimir Putin who did it. The white media didn't say, well, buddy, how do we know that you didn't have it? They say, yeah, it was putting all right. Hugo Chavez, on the other hand, suddenly gets diagnosed with cancer, and nobody's going to go, you sure the U.S. did come up with this? You sure the U.S. ain't behind it? I'm not saying that's what occurred. I'm just asking why nobody else has thought of that. That's all. After Chavez's very convenient death, Nicolas Maduro became the leader of Venezuela. Now, Chavez made clear to the people this is the man who needs to lead them. He chose Nicolas Maduro for one central primary reason. He had confidence that Maduro would not betray the Chavista revolution. In other words, he was not going to betray the people back to the Blanco ruling class again. He wasn't going to go back to the bad old days. The U.S. has tried to get a puppet in there, some guy named Whyt, but that didn't work. The people rejected him and sent him packing. And since then, there have been numerous assassination attempts against Maduro, including a drone with a bomb attached. Gee, sounds exactly what the Dallas PD did with Michael Johnson, now don't it? The U.S. put crushing sanctions on Venezuela, made it very clear, you sit on top of the world's largest oil reserve, and we're going to control it, or we're going to crush your economy and your country out of existence. That's what the U.S. has been doing to Venezuela for the last several years. Demonizing Venezuela, demonizing its leader, saying it's a dictatorship, undemocratic, abuses and brutalizes its own people, yeah, just like the United States, huh? Well, there's no way in hell that the U.S. is going to be doing business with him. Why, we're not going to be propping up a dictator. That's the reason why the U.S. has banned Russian oil. We're not propping up a dictator, even though it took the U.S. until this week to figure out that Vladimir Putin's a bad guy. But now that absent-minded Biden has realized, guys, we cut off that Russian oil. Where are we going to get some oil from now? Now they're trying to make it nice with Venezuela. And the white media's spin on this, after everything the U.S. has done, after all the demonization the white media's done, the fact that the U.S. has got its butt in a crack now and doesn't know how the hell they're going to get out of this one, they're going hand in hand, begging the very man who they've been trying to assassinate for years now, the very man whose predecessor the U.S. in a violent coup overthrew and tried to overthrow a democratically elected government in Venezuela. Now the U.S. is going down there hand in hand, begging for some oil. But that ain't how the white media's portraying it. No, they're pathetically, ridiculously trying to make it sound like Venezuela's back is to the wall. The U.S. has got Venezuela in a corner, and the U.S. is spelling out terms. This is how Reuters, which is a wire service, one of the primary ways that a lot of these white media organizations get their news, comes from Reuters. They just copy and paste what Reuters says. And here's how Reuters described it. U.S. officials have demanded Venezuela supply at least a portion of oil exports to the United States as part of any agreement to ease oil trading sanctions on the OPEC member nation, two people close to the matter said. That's how they begin this propaganda piece. They start off with what is a lie. The U.S. is demanding that Venezuela supply them oil. Venezuela ain't gonna do nothing. They've been under sanctions for years now. Anything that Biden's doing regarding Russia that hurts the U.S. ain't going to hurt Venezuela at all. They're sitting on top of oil, and they got people who are willing to buy it. Yeah, the U.S. sanctions hurt them economically, but there's nothing more the U.S. can do to them, short of bombing them or something. So the U.S. is not in a position to demand anything. It's not like the white media trying to make it sound like Venezuela's sitting there quaking in their boots while the U.S. says, here's how it's going to be. See, this is one of the things that white supremacy's done for the longest time. You can go all the way back to the Romans with this particular propaganda technique. It's the practice of making your victory sound good and making your defeat sound even better. This is the reason why whenever the Romans would have some victory on the battlefield, they would portray it as a glorious act of valor. And, we crushed those guys and showed them who's boss, and we did it easy. And whenever the Romans lost a battle, why? It was a valiant sacrifice by men who knew that their lives were being given for the greater good. These band of brothers. The Brits did the same thing. The Americans did the same thing. They win a battle, and it's just the storyline, the narrative is the triumph of American firepower. They lose a battle, and it's the valor of the American soldier. That's what's going on. That's our job as the U.S. Now here they are, going to these very same people who are so empowered. Nicolas Maduro's still there, and a dang thing changed. The attempt to install a puppet leader failed. The attempts to assassinate Maduro had failed. And now you have members of Congress who are saying we can't do business with Venezuela here. Biden is saying we got to do business with them. And the white media's got to conceive as if the U.S. really put the screws to Venezuela, as if Venezuela is feeling the heat. This is propaganda, weak propaganda, blatant propaganda, the same kind of crap the U.S. ridiculed Russia for during the Cold War. The Soviet Union was impoverishing its own people, all the while telling them that they had to sacrifice for the greater good. The people had to accept suffering because the capitalists must be stopped. Soviets told their people that we're all in this together. That's what the Politburo and the Soviet elite said. Meanwhile, those Soviet bigwigs were in their luxury homes, driving their fancy cars, eating rich food, and stacking up the country's wealth in offshore bank accounts. And all the while, state-run media out of Moscow, like Pravda, was telling the Russian people how noble they were for the sacrifices they were making. Make them feel good about the fact that they're being pummeled into economic destruction. And then in 1989, the Soviet Union collapsed, and what did the noble people of Russia have to show for all their noble sacrifice? They were dirt poor, while the leaders who forced all those sacrifices on them became filthy rich. That's what this white media glorification of slashing our pockets reminds me of, because that's what it is. We've seen this story before, okay, folks? You really think you're going to talk me into feeling good about having less money in my pocket? You're going to make me feel better about a country that opens its arms and makes a neo-Nazi militia into a formal part of their army? You're going to tell me how that's a good thing and how I should feel good about that? You think you're going to get out here and wave the flag and tell me we need to preserve democracy in Ukraine? I got a better idea. How about bring democracy to the U.S.? That would be a first, because this country has never had democracy for a single moment of a single day. And that's by design. That's intentional. You got these white leftists who pretend to be mystified. Why is it the U.S. keeps failing to set up democracies abroad? All those countries the U.S. claimed it would turn into democracies, and every single one of them ended in disastrous failure. All these attempts to bring democracy to the world fail. Why? The reason it fails is because you can't teach what you don't know. That's why the U.S. failed to export democracy. You can't teach what you don't know. So no, I'm not celebrating any of this. And it's not fine with me because I had no say in it. So while the white media is trying to keep people distracted from how much economic suffering they're going to actually be enduring with tall tales that Vladimir Putin, why he's gassing up his nuclear rockets, the bombs could be falling any moment now. Meanwhile, you're going to be getting impoverished at the doggone gas pump and at the cash register and everywhere else. And well, there's not going to be so much attention on that because, hey, at least you're still alive, right? A lot of people, including those who ought to know better, seem to have fallen for the white media's okey-doke. That's a shame. Because eventually when the people get tired of this, when they finally realize you can't put feel-good glorification of Ukraine in your gas tank or in your belly, that's when public sentiment's going to turn, but by then it's going to be too late. And no matter when or how this issue resolves itself, the fact that people went along with their own mass impoverishment without so much as batting an eyelash, that's going to teach the white media a very dangerous lesson, which is they still have the power to convince people of just about anything if they put the right spin on it. Good day, and be one.
You know, I was just thinking, it's been years now since I slept with 4